It's finally upon us. The 1.0 release of Darkest Dungeon 2 is just 7 days away, assuming I get this video out on time. And I thought it was time to go over everything that we know about the 1.0 release. Because at the end of the day, expectations can be premeditated disappointments. And so knowing what is in and what is not in can help us to keep our expectations in check and get excited for what is coming in the release. So, without further ado, let's just talk about some high-level stuff. The release is happening on May 8th. It's been in early access since October 2021, and a lot has changed in the game. I've played over 500 hours in the intervening couple of years, and I've learned a lot about the game. I'm going to be making some guides in the coming weeks, so if that's interesting to you, hit the subscribe and the like button, and I'll be very excited to share some of the things that I've learned over the time. But this game, Darkest Dungeon 2, is a significant departure from the format of Darkest Dungeon 1. It's taking more of a episodic roguelite type of tilt as opposed to the kind of like long epic narrative that the first Darkest Dungeon had. You'll still have a pretty in-depth meta progression system where you'll be building out the Altar of Hope, which is a lot like the Hamlet from the first game. But on average, runs are going to be about 5 hours long, give or take. The heroes will persist from run to run, but there is no leveling up of heroes, and any equipment that they have will be lost between runs. But they will keep any quirks that they acquire. And then last but not least, you can only have one of each hero. So those dreaming of the days of Quad Leper in Darkest Dungeon 2 are going to have to wait for modding support, which we will be talking about at least briefly in this video. So where do we begin when we're talking about what's coming out in 1.0? I think we go back to this image. This image was released early in the development of Darkest Dungeon 2 in the early access. And it was basically a community roadmap where they shared with us what they were planning to do. Now, after this was released, they shifted to a much more like small update focused way of building things rather than these large 6 milestones. But nonetheless, I went through and I marked everything that we've gotten to date. And we'll talk more about it as we go through the video. And then I'm going to highlight in green the things that are still outstanding. So you can see they made good progress on the work that they've done. We got the barnacle-encrusted new region, which is the Shroud. We got pets. We got the Act 3 boss. We got the Cultist update. We got lots of trinket and quirk adjustments. We got beasts in the form of spiders and dogs, etc. We got the Vestal and also the Bounty Hunter. And then most recently, in Redemption's Road patch, we got the driving and journey improvements update. But that leaves a handful of things that have not been released. The big one on the left in the M4 section was another region. We have not gotten a region after the Shroud. Hero Origin skins, a new wandering boss, the Act 4 final boss, some story content updates, a final new playable hero, Act 5, and achievements are all still pending. So I listed all those out so that we could see them a little more easily. But basically, we have a new region and everything that comes with that. The skins for heroes, a wandering boss, 2 confessions, a new playable hero, and achievements. That's what was left on the roadmap from when they started out early access that they said they would do before 1.0. Now, there's been a lot of discussion, and what I did was I've consolidated all of the Twitter back and forth so that we can kind of go over it quickly here in order to get the lowdown on each of these. So the first is they confirmed that achievements on Steam will be available at launch. I don't think this should come as a surprise to anyone, but for those achievement hunters out there, good news. Next, we have the Origin playable skins. If you haven't played the game, basically, as you unlock the heroes by going to these things called hero shrines, the heroes are dressed up in various interesting uniforms. As an example, Dismas at one point was a prison inmate, so he has like the black and white striped pajamas type of things. These will not be coming in 1.0. Hero Origin skins apparently are on the roadmap for a future release. Hero recolors, though, are going to be. It looks like each hero is probably going to get 3-ish palettes, and then there's also something that they're calling weapon kits that appear to slightly modify the nature of the weapons that heroes have. On Twitter, they confirmed that this will be a cosmetic-only change and is just designed to add variation to the game. We'll have to see how many there are, but it's always nice to have a little bit of customization. The next big thing that has been a Twitter on Twitter is other platforms. Basically, the short and long of this, you can read the tweets if you are so inclined, but Mac, Steam Deck, and consoles are all in the works, but none of them will be available on release. My guess with Steam Deck is that it will work, but the absence of controller support will make it a little awkward to play Darkest Dungeon 2 pre-update. But it's on their list, they're thinking about it, and they're working hard on it. Next up is the Wandering Boss and the Gaunt Surgeon. The Wandering Boss is speculated to be the Collector from the original Darkest Dungeon. We'd love to see them show back up. Unfortunately, neither of these are going to be showing up in the 1.0 release. The Gaunt Surgeon was a collaboration with Red Hook and the Make-A-Wish Foundation. Looks super, super cool. And we'll see it when we see it at some point in the future. The Infernal Torch will be returning with 1.0. For those who are unaware, in the early access, the most recent update that they made to the game, they changed a bunch of things with how loathing works, and they decided to disable the Infernal Torch as part of that. And it will be coming back in some modified new form. There's the way that Flame is working in the game now is quite a bit different than it used to. It's now handing out blind tokens. If it's really dark, it hands out blind tokens to the heroes, and when it's bright, it hands out blind tokens to the enemies. So if they leave that as is, Infernal Torch runs are going to become a lot more difficult because you're going to be getting a lot of random blind tokens. Next, just a hodgepodge of things. Modding is going to come in a future update, not as part of 1.0. If you buy the Steam version and you already had the Epic's Games version, there will be an automatic saved game migration that will take place, and they have lots of future updates planned. As an additional kind of side note on this one, if you watched the dev live stream that they did not too long ago, you'll know that they are planning to do a lot more work on this game after 1.0. I don't think you would hear Red Hook say it, but the 1.0 release, I think, for them was kind of the minimum viable product that they can put out and have a clean conscience about the fact that they took Epic Games' money to make it a platform exclusive. So essentially, they have a ton of things to do. They have a ton of things planned, new heroes, new regions, etc. But they feel like they've done enough that now they're ready to put it out on Steam. And I think there are a lot of people that are really happy that it's going to be coming out on Steam very soon. So now these are some of the screenshots from promotional materials that they put out. The first is 6 regions to survive. This confirms that there will not be a new region from my perspective in 1.0. I don't think they would have put out this video and said 6 regions to survive if there was actually going to be a 7th. And then additionally, they also talk about the fact that there are 10 factions with over 60 enemies. Again, we have seen all of these factions before, so it is unlikely that they will be adding a new region that would come with a new faction. So as a reminder, like an overview, the regions that we currently have is we have the Feeder, which is the home of the Harvest Child. It's very Blight-centric. We have the Sprawl, which is the home of the Librarian. It is very Fire-centric. Then we have the Tangle, which is this like dense jungle, dense wood type of thing, home of the Dreaming General. The Shroud, a jaunty nautical-themed area that the devs have confirmed is intentionally a little more difficult than the other regions. Home of the Leviathan, and probably my favorite region thematically. And then we have the Sluice, which is a shorter interstitial region. It does not have a lair boss associated with it, although Wilbur from Darkest Dungeon 1 does make a guest appearance from time to time. And it is home of the Swine folk, not the Wine folk. That's a different type of crew. And then the final region is the very short mountain region where the final boss of each confession lives. You go there, you do 2 cultist fights, and then you fight the final boss. As a reminder, because I think this is an important thing, once you start to play the game more, you get familiar with what each of the pieces of content that Red Hook develops entails. So for instance, if they were going to develop a new region, it would have a unique faction / set of enemies. It would have unique visuals for the traps, both the wheel and armor traps. It would have a sub-region like the tunnel in the Tangle or the cornfields in the feeder. It has a unique set of trinkets that are region specific, like the blight trinkets from the feeder. It has a lair and a lair boss with 2 boss trophies, and then possibly some other unique mechanic like the Leviathan's Breath. So across the board, just as an observation, regions are the single largest source of content in the game. When they roll out a new region, it's a very big deal because it comes with a huge amount of different content. The other major piece that we're going to be dealing with in this update are confessions. Confessions are less content. And I don't mean that to be critical, but just like fundamentally, a confession really only comes with 3 things. It comes with an ordainment, which is a blessing that enemies get as you move further through the run, and that will give them additional powers or the ability to dot you, cause them to hit harder, have more hit points. There is a unique loathing proc, so if your loathing meter fills completely, something terrible will happen to your party, and they have a custom one for each confession. And then the final boss of each confession is kind of like a unique capstone to that confession experience. Confessions, relatively easy to add in comparison to regions in terms of the amount of content that they have to develop. They're really only developing 1 new enemy, 1 boss, although the bosses obviously take a lot of work. So now that we've gone through all the social media, this is where we are. The things that we have struck through is new region, new faction, new lair boss, hero origin story skins, and the wandering boss. We will be getting Confession 4, Confession 5 with their story beats, a new playable hero, we'll talk about them in a minute, achievements, and hero recolors and weapon kits. So not necessarily the patch that I was initially expecting when I started doing the research for this video, but there's definitely some meat on the bones for this particular update. So let's talk about that new playable hero. This is the current roster of heroes that we have at our disposal, and a new friend is joining the fray, the Flagellant. You actually can't see the Flagellant in the upper right, but we'll see plenty more press bits and pieces. But the Flagellant is a returning cast member from Darkest Dungeon 1, but looking a lot rougher than they did in the previous one. They have underwent a transformation from being kind of like a virile masochist to now being what I can only describe as kind of like inspired by the undead from World of Warcraft. They are looking beyond death at this point, and that is kind of part of their backstory. So the first teaser that we got is what you see on the left there. That was the guess who's coming type of thing. The wristband was an immediate tell that it was going to be the Flagellant. Then a few days later, we got the 3 paths: the Maniac, the Exanimate, and the Scourge. And I've put a little bit of text below here with my hypothesis on the kind of like path identities that are coming with this. I think the Maniac is going to be your like stress healing focused hero, so the most like support focused one. I think the Exanimate is going to be your kind of like low health, high risk, high reward. The Flagellant is always that, but I think this one is going to be heavily focused on getting to death's door or getting to low health quickly and utilizing those abilities in a strengthened format. Type of thing. And then we have the Scourge, which I am likening to the Alchemist from the Plague Doctor's path sets. So heavily focused on blight and applying blight. If I had to guess, and this is, entirely a guess, if it's anything like the other ones, I think the Alchemist style spec with some blight resist reduction and a few other things is probably going to be the strongest of the 3, just because dots are so incredibly dominant. But the Flagellant comes with some more wrinkles. First, we got their full move set, so we'll go over that very quickly. Punish is a brutal flail strike with a blight component. It will probably hit the front 2 ranks. Then we have Fester, destroy a corpse on the battlefield, blighting those around it. This is a new mechanic that I'm super excited about, actually. I'm very curious. I think if the blight is big enough, this could be a really fun one. It's unlikely to have any effect on boss fights, but it could be a neat piece of kit, and it's a new mechanic that we haven't really seen. We haven't seen an offensive corpse removal. Deathless, the Flagellant sacrifices his own body to restore another hero's health. So this is going to be some type of I trade my health for your health type of thing. Endure, relieve a party member of stress at the cost of his own mind. This is, again, a stress transfer ability. I think that in my experience, Endure plays really well with things like the Jester. So you concentrate the stress from your party onto the Flagellant and then stress heal it down. And then we have Lash's Gift. Strikes himself with his flail, raising his own health while buffing an ally's strength and defenses. This is probably a low health only ability, so he has to get down to maybe 20% hit points to use it, but it sounds like it could be very useful and really incentivize that reduction in health. Then we have Acid Rain, which I assume is the equivalent of Rain of Whips from Darkest Dungeon 1. Pummels his opponents with a virulent downpour, dealing damage and blight in equal measure. It's interesting that they say in equal measure. That might mean that the blight component is relatively small, or Acid Rain is going to hit surprisingly hard. Or equal measure is just a nice turn of phrase. Then we have More. The Flagellant covets pain, using it to heal himself after drawing enemy attacks. So this looks like it's going to have a taunt type of ability. We might see one of the paths have more of a taunt like variety to it. Maybe that first one is a bit more like tank focused, kind of like the Vestal's Chaplain path. Then we have Suffer, relieves a party member of their blight, bleed, and burn by taking it upon himself. This is a familiar one from Darkest Dungeon 1. Sepsis, inflicts tremendous blight while recovering from the brink of death. I assume that this is the equivalent of Exsanguinate, and it will be, it'll be a heal self while also applying a massive blight. It will probably be a very, very strong ability if the previous Flagellant's kit was any indication. Then we have Undying, injures himself to provide regeneration for another. It's nice to see another heal over time ability. Getting the one that we got for the Vestal has been really nice, and I think heal over times have a lot of power. And then last but not least, we have Necrosis, strikes down all blight-infected foes while his own flesh knits back together. I expect, once again, this is a low health only one. It certainly sounds like this could pair insanely well with Grave Robber and Plague Doctor for a very blight-heavy crew. The last thing to talk about is not an ability, but this Flagellant, much like the previous one, has a meltdown all their own called Toxic. It is a custom stress response. It impacts him less than a meltdown and reduces his health to a threshold where the abilities that need it are immediately available, while refreshing all his cooldowns to make sure they're up for use. This seems like it could be very powerful. We're just going to have to see how much it affects relationship. Relationship was something that we didn't have in the first Darkest Dungeon, and I find it concerning if the Flagellant constantly melting down is going to be harming their relationships. That's going to make it basically a non-starter from my perspective. Relationships are too important, and getting cursed with negative relationships is too challenging. But that's kind of the Flagellant in a nutshell, with one very notable exception, and that is that the Flagellant is not a standard hero from the standard kit like some of the others. For those who don't know, the Bounty Hunter is a very abnormal hero in the sense that you hire them for one region, and the Flagellant also has some kind of like funk to them. The first bit of funk is that they come with a unique adversary, Death. And Death is apparently an adversary kind of designed to counter a lot of the power of the Flagellant, so I would assume Death probably has very high blight resist and a handful of other things, maybe ignores Death Blow a bit, those types of things. Death is obviously pictured over here on the right. My guess is they are a size 2, and they spawn in with 2 graves that are size 1, either behind them or in front of them, and they probably do a bit of shuffling, if I had to guess. From the way they're describing it, this particular enemy is going to show up randomly after some events and is going to be kind of a real pain that's going to stress test your party additionally. And this is counterbalanced by the fact that the Flagellant is going to be of a higher power level than some of the other heroes. It's a very interesting mechanic that essentially death is chasing the Flagellant. Unlike the Bounty Hunter, though, the Flagellant will have a fully unlockable backstory, so we'll be getting 5 story beats as we unlock his additional abilities. He deals blight damage instead of bleed, and I would say the kit is probably like 70% similar to the first Darkest Dungeon. So very exciting. The Flagellant is definitely going to be kind of like the most exciting piece of the new update. So speaking of the new update, let's just talk about it one last time here. We're going to have 2 new confessions with their stories. Confessions are going to include a new boss, a new ordainment, a new loathing effect, and a story. We're going to find out kind of how the academic caused the end of the world, for a bit of an oversimplification there. We're going to have a new playable hero in the Flagellant that comes with a new adversary and will presumably have their own class trinkets. So I would expect we'll get, I think, 4 more trinkets to go with the Flagellant as well. The Infernal Torch will be returning, potentially in some new and modified way. I think they've always had hopes that it was going to be more interesting than just pinning your torch at 0, but we'll have to see how that works out. Steam achievements will be coming. The hero recolors and weapon kit cosmetic is going to be part of the new update. One unconfirmed piece is they briefly made the denial confession very short. 2 regions didn't require you to kill a lair boss. They rolled that change back, and there will probably be some type of tutorial that they potentially roll in with the denial confession. But for the time being on early access, it's just been back to its standard long version, but you get 5 mastery at the start of it to kind of make things a little easier. We may see the short version come back. We may not. We don't know. And then it is my presumption that there will be a lot of other stuff coming with this update too. So probably some new voice lines, lots of polish, lots of quality of life. Every update that they've put out, there's been a lot of interesting additional stuff that they've added in. But that is what to expect when you are expecting a Darkest Dungeon 2 1.0 release. Hopefully this was helpful. I tried to aggregate a lot of information and put it all in one place. If this was, please toss me a like and a subscription. In the coming weeks, as 1.0 rolls out, I'm going to be rolling out a set of boss guides that are going to be focused on trying to get people comfortable with beating the confession bosses that we already know, but more importantly, taking down the lair bosses. What do you need to do to prepare? How do their mechanics actually work? How do you play against them? Because I think that is the single most difficult hurdle for new players to get over. It's hard to get to the point where you're consistently taking down lair bosses. They often are the big spike in difficulty that ends runs. But that does it for me. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you all hopefully in the next one, and maybe on May 8th when I start live streaming Darkest Dungeon 2. Have a good one. Bye-bye.